Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
At Easter last year, Ricky raised his glass and toasted, "To Jess, at least you get free breadsticks." The whole damn table burst into laughter like it was the funniest thing anyone had ever said. Plates clinked, silverware rattled against porcelain, wine glasses trembled with the pounding of palms on the old oak table, and even my dad, Ron, who usually only laughed when someone fell down or lost their job, wiped a tear from his eye. I sat there, gripping the stem of my glass so tight I thought it might snap clean in half. Everybody laughed. Except me. That night, sitting in my tiny apartment with the smell of cheap perfume and garlic bread still clinging to my coat, I made a decision that would change everything. It was not the first time I had been the punchline at family gatherings. It started small when I was 19 and took a summer job waiting tables at a rundown Italian place on Main Street, just to pay for books at community college. "Just a phase," Mom said back then, patting my arm like I was a recovering addict. "A stepping stone," Dad said, already picturing me in a pantsuit at some office job with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Ricky, on the other hand, went straight for the gut from day one, calling me the breadstick queen every time I came to Sunday dinners, tossing crumpled napkins at me like they were dollar bills at a strip joint. Years rolled by and the jokes sharpened. I was 23, then 26, then pushing 30, and still working in restaurants, still seen as a waitress, a nobody, a girl who couldn't do better. Every Thanksgiving, Christmas, 4th of July, Easter, it was the same damn thing. They would ask where I was working now, barely hiding their smirks, like I was announcing new shifts at the DMV. Someone would crack a joke about my career growth being how fast I could carry 3 plates at once. The worst part was how casual they were about it, like it was just friendly ribbing, no harm meant. But it stuck, every single time, like little splinters under my skin. I wanted to scream some days, to tell them that I loved what I did, that feeding people made me feel alive, that the clink of plates and buzz of a busy dining room felt more real than any cubicle ever could. But every time I tried to explain, to fight back even a little, I could see it in their eyes, the polite nods, the condescending smiles, the way they all thought I was just making excuses for failure. Eventually, I stopped trying. It was easier to just let them think I was some lost cause clinging to a tray of half-empty wine glasses. That Easter night, after Ricky's stupid toast, I drove home with the radio blasting, windows down, trying to drown out the angry voices screaming in my head. I thought about every table I had ever cleaned, every rude customer I had smiled at, every tip I had pocketed with a thank you that barely masked the tired ache in my legs. I thought about how they had never once asked what I wanted out of life, never once believed that I could be anything more than the sum of the dirty aprons and grease-stained shoes they saw in their heads. That night, in the silence of my little kitchen, staring at the wilted houseplant I kept forgetting to water, I pulled out an old notebook from the drawer. It was the same notebook I used back when I was 17, dreaming about owning a little cafe where the coffee was strong and the pie was homemade. The cover was battered and half the pages were loose, but it was still mine, still stubborn and alive, like something deep down inside me that refused to die no matter how many times I had been laughed at. I started writing, not just dreams this time, but real plans, ugly, rough, desperate plans. How much money I had saved. How much more I would need. What kind of loans I could maybe, possibly, pray for a miracle qualify for. I mapped out the kind of restaurant I wanted to open, casual but classy, hearty food with no pretension, a place where the kind of people who raised me could sit down and shut up for once, not because they were stuffed with self-satisfaction, but because the food was just that damn good. I was not naive. I knew the odds were stacked higher than a Sunday brunch line. I knew I was looking at years of working doubles, saving every tip, living on ramen and secondhand shoes. I knew there would be failures, hell. I had already lived through enough of those to write a book. But I also knew something else that night. I knew I was done playing the part they had written for me. I was done laughing at jokes that gutted me from the inside out. I was done pretending that their approval was some prize worth crawling toward on my knees. They had no idea who I really was. And for once, I was grateful for that. Let them keep underestimating me. Let them keep sneering behind their wine glasses and whispering about poor Jessica, who still could not figure out what she wanted to do with her life. Let them keep raising their damn glasses to toast my failures. Because the next time they did, they would be standing under my name. They just didn't know it yet. The next morning, I woke up early, still in my Easter dress, makeup smudged, hair a mess, heart hammering with something that was not quite fear and not quite excitement. I folded the old notebook shut, tucked it into my purse, and went to work my shift like nothing had changed. I smiled at customers. I carried plates. I picked up spilled forks. But inside, something had cracked open and started growing, like a seed finally seeing sunlight. This was not about revenge, not really. It was about reclaiming something I had been too afraid to fight for all these years. It was about finally living a life that was mine, not one they tried to cram me into like a pair of ill-fitting shoes. Still, I would be lying if I said the idea of their faces when they realized the truth didn't make me grin just a little bit. Maybe a lot. And that was enough, for now. Enough to keep me moving. Enough to make me dangerous. After that Easter night, I started treating every shift like it was my last lifeboat on a sinking ship, and I was not about to go down without a fight. Every tip, every crumpled dollar, every extra shift I could scrape together became sacred, tucked away into a battered old coffee can hidden in the back of my closet behind a pile of sweaters I had not worn since college. I lived on cheap pasta and watered-down coffee, patched the same 3 pairs of jeans until the knees looked like tattered flags, and took buses instead of fixing my car because I knew every cent counted. I worked like a woman possessed, smiling through the aches in my back and the burning in my calves, running on fumes most days and pure stubbornness the rest. After closing time, when the restaurant lights dimmed and the smell of marinara and burnt garlic clung to my hair, I did not crash on the couch like everyone else. I went home, pulled out my notebook, fired up my battered old laptop, and taught myself everything the world had never thought I was smart enough to learn. Marketing strategies, small business loans, restaurant management, menu design. I devoured every article, every free online course, every secondhand textbook I could get my hands on. I sat at the tiny kitchen table until my vision blurred and my fingers cramped from scribbling notes, dreaming of the day when I would not have to pick up anyone else's dirty plates ever again unless I damn well wanted to. I learned that most restaurants failed not because the food was bad, but because the people running them thought good lasagna was enough to save a sinking ship with 1,000 leaks. At night, when the city outside my window quieted to a low, tired hum, I wrote menu ideas on napkins, drew floor plans on the backs of junk mail, and taught myself how to cost out every dish down to the last grain of salt. I had no mentors, no big investors, no safety net waiting to catch me when I stumbled, but I had something nobody else could see: a raw, gnawing fire in my gut that refused to be snuffed out by their cheap jokes and backhanded comments. 6 months into my private rebellion, an opportunity fell into my lap like a broken bird too stubborn to die. There was an old diner on 5th Street, a crumbling little place called Marcy's that had been serving burnt coffee and rubbery pancakes since before I was born. It was ugly, yellowed linoleum floors, ripped vinyl booths, grease stains on the ceiling, and it was for sale dirt cheap because the owners were finally giving up. It was the kind of place that most people would not look at twice unless they needed a bathroom in a hurry, but when I saw it, I did not see the grime or the sagging ceiling tiles. I saw a beginning. Scraping together every last cent I had saved, plus a small, shaky loan from a local credit union that probably should have said no but didn't, I bought it. I signed the papers with a hand that shook so hard I thought I might tear right through them. The first night after getting the keys, I sat alone in the empty dining room, the hum of the broken refrigerator the only sound in the dark, and cried until my throat hurt. I was terrified. I was exhilarated. I was completely and utterly alone, There were days in those first few months when I thought I had made the biggest mistake of my life. Plumbing leaks I could not afford to fix, fryers that refused to stay lit, a customer base that consisted mostly of old men who tipped in nickels and dimes if they tipped at all. Some nights I worked the grill, washed dishes, scrubbed toilets, and waited tables all by myself because I could not afford to hire anyone yet. I lost weight because I forgot to eat, gained circles under my eyes so dark they looked like bruises, and had panic attacks so bad in the walk-in freezer that once or twice I thought I might actually die right there next to a crate of expired pickles. But little by little, inch by inch, something started to change. A handful of loyal customers started coming in not because they had nowhere else to go, but because they liked what I was serving. I switched up the menu, bringing in hearty, home-cooked meals that reminded people of something their grandmother might have made before life got too busy. I painted the walls myself, patched the booths with leftover fabric from a craft store, and planted cheap plastic flowers in the dusty window boxes because even fake blooms were better than nothing. There were tiny victories, a Friday night when every table was full, a Sunday brunch where the line snaked out the door, a local newspaper blurb that called the diner a hidden gem for real comfort food. Each small win stitched me back together, piece by piece, reminding me that I was not crazy for believing in something nobody else could see. Have you ever had someone laugh at your dreams? What did you do about it? Drop your story in the comments. I will be reading every single one because trust me, I know exactly how it feels. Through it all, my family remained blissfully ignorant. They still pictured me wiping down tables and fetching free refills, still patted me on the head during family parties like a kid who drew a half-decent picture at school. And I let them. I smiled. I nodded. I let Ricky make his stupid breadstick jokes without blinking an eye because I knew something they did not. My story was just getting started, and the best part had not even begun yet. The fire inside me had not just survived. It had grown into a blaze big enough to light up every ugly, broken corner of that old diner. And for the first time in my life, I was not running from who I was. I was building something from the ground up, with calloused hands and a stubborn heart, something they could never take from me no matter how hard they laughed. They thought I was still that same scared girl in a waitress apron, bowing my head and laughing along with their jokes. They thought wrong. The diner started filling up faster than I ever expected, and before long, I found myself turning the little paper sign on the front door to closed at noon because we were sold out of meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and pecan pie. Word traveled fast in a small town, and soon enough, people started calling ahead, asking if there was a seat open, asking if Miss Barnes was cooking today, because if she was not, they would come another time. There was a rhythm to it, a heartbeat pulsing through the old walls of that greasy diner, and somehow I had managed to breathe life back into something everyone else had given up on. The money started coming in slow at first, trickling like water from a leaky faucet, but it was real money, honest money earned from long days and sore feet and more cups of coffee than any human should ever consume. I did not blow it on fancy clothes or shiny cars or weekend getaways like Ricky would have if he ever managed to hold down a job longer than 6 months. No, I saved every extra dollar, stuffed it into new envelopes hidden under the floorboards of my apartment, because deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Owning one diner, one tiny patched-together miracle, was not enough to silence the old voices in my head, the ones that sounded suspiciously like my mother's tight-lipped disapproval and my father's gruff disappointment. No, I needed more, not because I wanted to shove it in their smug faces, although I would be lying if I said that thought did not keep me warm at night, but because somewhere along the line, I realized that success tasted better when you knew you built it with your own bloody hands. I found the second place by accident, driving home one night after a particularly brutal double shift where the dishwasher had quit halfway through dinner service, and I had spent 3 hours elbow-deep in suds and spaghetti scraps. It was a crumbling old steakhouse on the edge of town, boarded up, weeds pushing through the parking lot like nature was trying to take it back. Most people would have seen a lost cause, a money pit, Another bad dream someone gave up on, but I saw opportunity, plain and hungry and waiting for someone crazy enough to believe in it. I spent 3 months haggling with the bank, smiling through meetings with stiff-collared loan officers who looked at me like I had wandered in off the street by mistake. I showed them my books, clean and tight, every penny accounted for, every dollar explained with the kind of ruthless precision that only comes from living close to the bone for years. I wore my best Goodwill blazer, the one with the missing button I sewed back on myself, and kept my voice steady when they asked if I really thought I could handle 2 businesses at once. When I finally signed the paperwork for the steakhouse, my hands did not shake the way they had when I bought the diner. This time, I knew what I was doing. This time, I walked through those battered doors and pictured the place not as it was, but as it could be: warm wood floors, low lighting, the smell of searing meat and fresh bread rolling out onto the sidewalk like a welcome mat for anyone who needed a little peace in their day. Renovating the steakhouse made fixing the diner look like child's play. I hired contractors when I could afford them and did the rest myself: scrubbing, painting, hammering, hauling old furniture to the curb until my back screamed and my fingers bled. I slept on the floor some nights, too tired to drive home, with a toolbox for a pillow and the sound of wind rattling the broken windows like a lullaby. Opening day came faster than I expected, and though I was terrified nobody would show up, the place was packed by 7 o'clock, every table full. Every chair occupied by someone who had heard whispers about a new spot in town that was actually worth getting dressed up for. I worked the grill myself that night, sweat pouring down my back, smoke clinging to my hair, heart pounding so loud I could barely hear the orders being called out. But when the last steak was served, when the last glass of whiskey was poured, I stood there behind the bar, looking out over the full dining room, and felt something I had never really known before: the pure, unfiltered taste of independence. Back at family gatherings, nothing changed. Not a damn thing. I still got the same tired jokes about my career, the same raised eyebrows when I mentioned I was still in food service, the same smug grins when Ricky nudged my father and said something about how maybe next year I would make shift manager. They had no idea. Not a single clue. Part of me wanted to scream it at them, to shove newspaper clippings under their noses, to haul them into my restaurant and point at my name on the menu, the sign, the liquor license. But another part of me, the bigger, smarter part, realized that their ignorance was its own kind of gift. They still saw me as the underdog, the screw-up, the family embarrassment who could not hack it in the real world. Fine. Let them. While they sat around the Easter table nursing hangovers from cheap wine and broken dreams, I was building an empire brick by goddamn brick. They thought I was still living paycheck to paycheck, smiling politely as customers snapped their fingers for refills, bending under the weight of a life they would never want for themselves. They thought wrong. And the best part was, they would not find out the truth until I decided it was time, and when that day came, it would not be a quiet revelation whispered over pie and coffee. No, when the truth finally hit them, it would land like a hammer, loud and undeniable, and for the first time in my life, they would have to see me for who I really was. Not a waitress. Not a punchline. Not a disappointment. But a woman who built herself out of nothing but grit, sweat, and the kind of stubborn hope you cannot kill no matter how many times you laugh in its face. The months rolled by, seasons turning one into another like worn pages flipping in a book that nobody cared enough to finish, and I watched my businesses bloom while my family remained stubbornly stuck in the past they had built for me. It was strange, really, how success could swell quietly around you, like a rising tide no one seemed to notice, while the people who were supposed to know you best stayed blind and deaf to everything you were becoming. At family gatherings, nothing changed, not the worn-out jokes, not the side glances dripping with pity, not the way Mom sighed whenever someone asked about me, like my life was some lingering cold she wished I would finally recover from. Thanksgiving at Aunt Marlene's was the worst that year, the mashed potatoes heavy and tasteless, the turkey dry enough to scrape the roof of your mouth, but the company was even worse than the food, and that was saying something. Ricky, already half drunk by 3 in the afternoon, leaned across the table with his crooked grin and said, "So, Jess, still slinging pancakes to the locals? Must be nice getting all the leftovers." Laughter bubbled up around him, low and mean, and I felt my face flush hot, not from embarrassment anymore, but from something sharper, something harder to swallow. I smiled. That new smile I had learned to wear like armor, polished and untouchable. "Yeah, Ricky," I said, reaching for the gravy boat like I could not care less. "Nothing wrong with a little honest work." Honest work, I thought bitterly as I remembered the 10-hour days, the back-breaking double shifts, the endless nights poring over profit margins and scheduling conflicts while Ricky pissed away another dead-end job at the local car lot. But I said nothing more because what was the point? Words were wasted on people who had already decided who you were and stapled that label to your forehead with such stubborn cruelty that they would rather die than admit they had gotten it wrong. It was not just the insults, either. It was the silences that were worse. The way conversations slid around me like oil on water, like my life was an uncomfortable subject best ignored in favor of safer topics like weather, sales at the mall, and who had just gotten divorced. Nobody asked real questions anymore. Nobody leaned in close and said, "Hey Jess, what's new with you?" Or "How's your life going?" They did not want to know. They wanted the version of me they could understand, the version that made them feel better about their own mediocre lives, the version that stayed conveniently small. And the truth is, after a while, I let them have it. I wrestled with the urge to tell them, oh, how I wrestled with it, late at night when the walls of my apartment felt too close and the neon hum from the diner sign flickered against the windows. I pictured standing up at Christmas dinner, champagne glass in hand, announcing in a voice clear and sure that I owned not one, not two, but 3 restaurants, that I employed people, fed families, kept the lights on for dozens of workers who depended on me. I pictured their faces cracking like dropped porcelain, the stunned silence, the frantic backpedaling. I imagined Ricky choking on his mom's green bean casserole. But when the fantasies faded, when the wine wore off and the anger settled into that familiar, hollow ache, I realized the truth I had been trying so hard not to see. Even if I told them, it would not matter. Recognition from people who never really saw you in the first place is a hollow kind of victory. And that realization cut deeper than any of their jokes ever had. You spend so much of your life thinking that once you hit a certain milestone, once you check off the right boxes, success, money, respect, the people who doubted you will finally see you, will finally say, "We were wrong, we're proud of you, you proved us wrong." But they don't. Most of the time, they can't. Admitting you succeeded means admitting they were wrong about you all along, and that is a pill too bitter for most people to swallow. So I stayed silent. I sat through Christmas and New Year's and 4th of July, listening to the same tired jokes and answering the same condescending questions with that polished, empty smile. I let them laugh. I let them believe whatever made them feel safe and small and certain. Meanwhile, my businesses grew. Meanwhile, my bank account swelled until numbers that once seemed like impossible dreams became just part of the daily ledger. Meanwhile, I was building a life so far beyond anything they could imagine that explaining it would be like trying to teach algebra to a dog. And still, every family event, every birthday party, every gathering at Aunt Marlene's sticky kitchen table felt like walking into a room where I was already dead, where my life had already been written, footnoted, and dismissed. It wore on me in ways I hated to admit, chipped away at the bright, stubborn hope I had fought so hard to keep alive. Because here is the ugly truth nobody tells you about success. It is lonely as hell when you have no one to share it with, no one who even cares enough to ask how you are really doing. Every check I deposited, every glowing Yelp review, every night when I stood in the empty restaurant after closing, mopping the floors by myself because it calmed my racing mind, it all felt a little heavier than it should have. Weighed down by the knowledge that the people whose pride I craved most would never give it, not because I was not worthy, but because they were too damn stubborn to look past their own expectations. And so I wrestled with the secret, carried it like a stone in my pocket. a constant heavy reminder that no matter how far you climb, some people will always see you at the bottom. But I was not finished. Not by a long shot. Because deep down, in the place they could never reach no matter how many cheap shots they took, I was already planning my next move, a move so bold, so undeniable, that even they would not be able to laugh it away. And this time, it would not be for their approval. It would be for me. The idea came to me not in some grand flash of genius or anger, but in a slow-burning moment of clarity while I was wiping down the bar at my newest restaurant, the one I had opened only 6 months ago. The one that already had regulars and birthday parties, and even a couple of glowing reviews from bloggers who called it the best hidden gem in the state. I was leaning over the wood, breathing in the sharp, clean scent of lemon oil and hard work, when it hit me, if they were never going to come to my world on their own, I was going to bring them there myself. I could almost hear Ricky's voice in my head, dripping with sarcasm. "What, Jess? You want us all to come to your little breadstick palace?" And I grinned so wide my cheeks hurt because yes, actually, that was exactly what I was going to do. But they were not going to know it until it was far too late to wriggle out of it. The plan was simple and cruel in its elegance. Easter was coming up, and like every year, the family had started the back-and-forth dance over who would host, who would cook, who would screw up the turkey or burn the pies. I waited until the arguments reached their predictable boiling point, and then, casually as dropping a penny in a wishing well, I suggested an alternative. "Hey," I said during one of the endless group texts, pretending I had not been waiting days for the perfect opening. "I know a place. Good food, big tables, and I know the owner. He'll give us a deal since it's a holiday." The responses came fast and stupid, exactly the way I knew they would. "Sounds better than cleaning my damn house," Aunt Marlene typed, her classic contribution to any plan that required her to lift a finger. "Will there be beer?" asked Cousin Tommy, because of course he did. "Jess knows a guy," Ricky added with a little laughing emoji at the end, and even though I could not see him, I knew exactly the smirk that would be plastered on his face, the one that made you want to punch him right in the teeth. "Sounds good," Mom said finally, which in my family was as close to enthusiastic agreement as you were ever going to get. It was done. Just like that, the trap was set. Over the next few weeks, I worked behind the scenes like a general preparing for battle, fine-tuning every detail until it gleamed like the edge of a knife. I reserved the largest private room at the restaurant, the one with the big windows overlooking the garden courtyard, the one I had always imagined using for weddings or fancy anniversaries or milestone birthdays. I picked the menu myself, nothing too flashy, nothing too obvious, just hearty, home-cooked dishes elevated to something just a little more special, just enough that even Ricky would have to shut up and chew for a minute. I had the staff briefed down to the last detail. They were sworn to secrecy, instructed to treat me like a regular guest, to let the reveal happen exactly when I wanted it. No, "Hey, boss," slip-ups. No, "Do you want your usual table?" Jess, accidents. This had to be perfect, no mistakes, no hints until the moment I decided to pull back the curtain. I even rehearsed my smile in the mirror at night, practicing that casual, breezy shrug I would give when the truth finally dawned on them, as if it was no big deal, as if I had not been dreaming of this moment for years, as if it did not burn in my chest every time one of them still treated me like the family disappointment. The hardest part was pretending not to care in the days leading up to it, keeping my voice even and my face blank when they joked about how Jess knows a guy, when they talked about Easter like it was just another Sunday, when they made little digs about whether the food would be edible or if we would end up ordering pizza instead. I smiled through it all, every word, every smug chuckle, every dismissive glance, because I knew something they did not. I knew that the ground was already shifting under their feet, and when it finally gave way, they would have no choice but to fall right into the truth I had built, brick by brick, night after lonely night. It was not about revenge, not really. It was about closure, about standing in the middle of everything they said I could never have and daring them to say otherwise. It was about showing them, not telling them, because words had never been enough, and honestly, I was tired of wasting mine. I spent the night before Easter walking through the restaurant after closing, trailing my fingers along the polished wood of the chairs, the cool glass of the windows, the crisp linen of the tables we had set up special for the family. I stood under the soft lights and let the quiet soak into my bones, breathing it in, holding it close, preparing myself for the moment that was almost here. I knew it might not go the way I wanted. I knew some of them might not react at all, might even double down on their indifference out of spite or pride. But it did not matter anymore. Because they would know. They would see. And for once, it would be impossible to laugh it away. I locked up the restaurant, slid into my car, and drove home under a sky full of stars that looked sharp enough to cut. Tomorrow, everything would change. Maybe not in the way they would admit out loud, maybe not in the way I used to dream about when I was younger and still foolish enough to think you could earn love like a paycheck if you just worked hard enough. But it would change all the same. And for the first time in a long, long time, I was ready. The morning of Easter dawned cold and gray, the kind of day that made you want to pull the blankets tighter and stay hidden from the world a little longer, but I was up before the sun, nerves firing under my skin like electric wires, buzzing too close to water. I dressed carefully, choosing a soft blue dress that looked effortless, but cost more than I used to make in a whole week slinging pancakes, slipping on a pair of low heels that would not slow me down if I needed to move fast. As I fastened the simple gold necklace around my throat, a gift I had bought for myself when the steakhouse hit its first profit goal, I caught my reflection in the mirror and gave myself a smile that was half challenge, half battle cry. The restaurant looked perfect when I arrived, the tables gleaming under the soft light, the place settings crisp and inviting, the floral arrangements fresh and vibrant with soft spring colors. My staff moved like a well-oiled machine, all knowing exactly what today meant even if they had to pretend it was just another busy Sunday to anyone who asked. I checked the reservation list twice, not because I doubted them, but because I needed something to do with my shaking hands, then stood near the host's stand, hidden just enough behind a column to watch without being seen. They started trickling in around noon, a slow-moving parade of familiar faces and cheap perfume and two loud voices that set my teeth on edge even though I had spent weeks preparing for this exact moment. Aunt Marlene waddled in first, dragging an oversized handbag and complaining about the parking, her husband trailing behind her looking like he would rather be anywhere else. My mother, Patricia, followed close behind, smoothing her cardigan with one hand, casting a sharp glance around the restaurant like she was already looking for things to criticize. Then came Ricky, of course, swaggering in with that same stupid grin plastered on his face, a wrinkled button-down shirt untucked over jeans that looked like they had seen better days, probably on someone else. He was already cracking jokes before he even fully crossed the threshold, nudging Tommy in the ribs and saying loud enough for half the restaurant to hear, "Bet Jess's buddy's place ain't even got real butter. Watch." I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood, but I smiled anyway, that same cold, polished smile I had been practicing for months, because today was not about getting even, it was about showing them, without a single word, exactly how wrong they had always been. The first flicker of confusion came when my mother stopped just inside the entrance, squinting up at the polished brass plaque mounted on the wall near the hostess stand. It was simple but elegant, the lettering clean and proud, Barnes Bistro, EST 2023. I saw her mouth the words, her brow furrowing slightly, but she shook it off with a small shrug and followed the hostess toward the private room we had set aside for our party. One by one, they filtered in, dropping coats on chairs, pulling out phones to check their faces in the black mirrors, making the same small talk they always made because God forbid anyone actually ask a real question or show real interest in anything deeper than the weather or the latest neighborhood gossip. Nobody connected the dots at first. Barnes was a common enough name, and besides, none of them would ever assume that I could own a place like this. In their eyes, I was still little Jess, the breadstick girl, the one who could barely hold a tray steady without dropping half the drinks. It was not until the manager, Todd, a tall, sharp-eyed man with sleeves rolled neatly to his elbows and a demeanor of calm authority, walked over to our table and greeted me first, not the table, not the guests, me, directly, with a warm good afternoon. "Miss Barnes, everything is ready for you," that the ripples started moving through the room. I caught the moment Ricky's smirk faltered, saw it in the way he blinked twice and shifted in his chair like he was trying to rearrange the reality of what he had just heard into something that made more sense. I saw it in the stiff set of my mother's shoulders, the way she pressed her lips into a thin line and suddenly became very interested in adjusting the silverware at her place setting. Todd handed me the wine list personally, asking if I wanted to make any last-minute changes, treating me with the kind of deference normally reserved for people whose names were on the mortgage, the payroll, and the damned liquor license. I flipped through it casually, making a small adjustment to the vintage on the house red, feeling the weight of every confused stare pressing against my skin like hot iron. Still, not a word was spoken. Not yet. The food started coming out, platters of rosemary roasted lamb, bowls of garlic whipped potatoes, plates of roasted spring vegetables so colorful they looked like paintings. My staff moved with quiet efficiency, offering wine pairings and topping off glasses, answering questions with easy smiles, and never once letting on that this day was anything but another routine service. Ricky kept looking around, his mouth twitching like he wanted to say something, but could not quite figure out how to frame it without sounding like a complete idiot. Aunt Marlene whispered something behind her hand to my mother, who gave a tight, almost imperceptible nod, but said nothing aloud. Finally, when the appetizers had been cleared and the entrees were being plated, it happened. "Jess," Ricky said, leaning back in his chair with a forced laugh, "you sure you know the owner that well? They're treating you like you're the Queen of Sheba or something." I set down my glass, folded my hands on the table, and smiled that same infuriating, unshakable smile I had been sharpening like a blade for years. "I do know the owner pretty well," I said, my voice calm, steady, almost bored. "In fact, you're looking at her." The silence that followed was almost painful in its perfection. Forks hovered halfway to mouths. Wine glasses paused in midair. Aunt Marlene coughed into her napkin. My father, who had barely said 2 words all afternoon, blinked once, slowly, like he was trying to reboot his entire brain. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. It was everything I had imagined and nothing like I expected, all at once. Because beneath the stunned silence, beneath the scrambling for new words and new ways to see me, I realized something that made my heart twist in my chest. They were not just shocked. They were embarrassed. Embarrassed that they had gotten it so wrong. Embarrassed that they had built their entire image of me on a foundation of ignorance and cruelty. Embarrassed that their small jokes and smaller minds had been exposed for what they truly were: cheap, hollow, and meaningless in the face of real, undeniable success. I lifted my glass again, tipped it slightly in their direction, and took a long, slow sip of wine. Then I leaned back in my chair, let the moment stretch long and thin like taffy pulling between fingers, and smiled wider. "Welcome to Barnes Bistro," I said, and the words tasted sweeter than anything on the menu. The rest of the afternoon unfolded in a strange, stilted rhythm, conversations starting and stuttering to awkward stops, compliments offered too late or too obviously, faces flushed with the heavy heat of wounded pride. But me? I sat there like a queen in her rightful castle, drinking in every second, every stolen glance, every stiff, forced smile. And I knew deep down that no matter what they said or did from this day forward, nothing could ever erase the truth they had been forced to see with their own eyes. The truth that I was never small. They had just been too blind to notice. The silence that hung over the table after my announcement was so thick it felt like something you could slice with a dull knife, the kind that struggles through overcooked ham and leaves a jagged mess behind. For a few long minutes, the only sounds were the clink of silverware against plates and the occasional awkward cough, as if everyone was collectively trying to find their footing in a room where the ground had suddenly and violently shifted beneath their feet. No one met my eyes, and for the first time in my entire life, I held the power without having to raise my voice or demand attention. It was almost funny, really, how hard they tried to pretend that nothing had changed. Like if they kept chewing and sipping and offering up meaningless small talk, the truth would somehow fold itself back up and slip away unnoticed. Aunt Marlene, bless her stubborn old heart, was the first to break the tension by loudly complimenting the food, her voice a little too bright, a little too forced. As she speared a piece of lamb on her fork and declared it not half bad, like she was handing out a gold star in a kindergarten classroom. Mom jumped in next, asking pointless questions about the decor. Did the owner pick out those curtains themselves? She asked, her voice tight and brittle like stretched plastic, and when I smiled and said, "Yes, I did," she gave a tiny nod and looked down at her plate so fast you would think it might bite her. Ricky, who had never once missed an opportunity to crack a joke at my expense in 30 years of breathing the same air, sat frozen with his beer halfway to his mouth, his face a complicated mess of confusion, disbelief, and something else that looked an awful lot like fear. I watched him try to form words, his mouth working silently like a fish gasping for oxygen, but whatever punchline he had been reaching for died somewhere deep in his throat, swallowed by the brutal, inescapable reality that the world was not what he thought it was and maybe never had been. For a while, they all tried their best to crawl back into the safety of normalcy, dragging conversation around the edges of the room like it was some wounded animal they could coax back to life, if only they ignored the blood trail long enough. Someone asked about the weather next week, someone else made a weak joke about traffic on the highway, and through it all, I sat there, swirling my wine in my glass, waiting, knowing that nothing they said could erase what had already happened. There is a strange kind of power in letting other people drown in their own discomfort without reaching out a hand to save them, a cold satisfaction in realizing that for once, you are the one who does not have to explain yourself, apologize, or smooth over the jagged edges of other people's egos. I had spent a lifetime folding myself small enough to fit inside their narrow expectations, and today I sat tall, taking up all the space I had earned, letting them flail in the void where their certainty used to be. It was not anger I felt, sitting there watching them squirm and flail. It was something quieter, heavier, almost mournful in a way, like realizing that the people you had spent so long trying to impress were not even worth the weight you had been carrying. Their approval, once so desperately craved, felt suddenly small and meaningless in the grand scheme of the life I had built without their permission or their help. Still, old habits die hard, and part of me, the raw, aching part that still lived in the shadow of every Easter joke, every backhanded compliment, every polite, crushing smile, needed something more than just their awkward silence. I needed to put a period at the end of the sentence, a final full stop they could never ignore, no matter how badly they wanted to. So I stood up, glass in hand, tapping it gently with my fork until the soft chime rang out and froze everyone mid-bite, mid-sentence, mid-excuse. They all turned to me, eyes wide, bodies tense like they were bracing for impact, and I smiled, slow and easy, the way you do when you know you have already won and the only thing left is deciding how much mercy you want to show. "I just wanted to thank you all," I said, my voice clear and steady in the charged air, "for coming today. It means a lot to share this meal with family, especially here, in a place that has meant so much to me." I paused, letting the words sink in, watching the slight flinches and darting glances, feeling the way the table seemed to pull tighter around itself like a noose. "I know it probably came as a surprise," I continued, still smiling, still calm, "but sometimes life takes you places you never thought you would go. Sometimes it teaches you that the people who doubt you the most are the ones who fuel you the hardest." Another pause, deliberate and heavy, the kind that demands attention without raising its voice. I would not be here today if it were not for everything and everyone who made me fight a little harder for what I wanted. I lifted my glass slightly, the light catching on the cut crystal, sending small rainbows splintering across the white tablecloth. So here's to dreams they said were too small, I said, my voice soft but sharp as a blade hidden in silk, to mountains they thought I could not climb, and to the quiet satisfaction of knowing exactly who you are, even when no one else ever bothered to look. I took a slow sip, savoring the heavy, stunned silence that followed, and set the glass down with a small, decisive click against the wood. Nobody clapped. Nobody cheered. They just sat there, staring at me like they had never really seen me before, and maybe for the first time, they finally were. Ricky cleared his throat, opened his mouth like he was about to say something, and then thought better of it, closing it again with a snap and reaching instead for his beer like it could shield him from the wreckage of the day. Aunt Marlene fidgeted with her napkin, twisting it between her fingers until it looked like a rope. My mother dabbed at the corner of her mouth with a trembling hand, pretending not to see the way her own reflection stared back at her from the gleaming knife blade beside her plate. And me? I smiled wider, leaned back in my chair, and watched the masks slip away one by one, exposing the raw, uncomfortable truth underneath. The smiles had vanished. The jokes had died. The game had ended, and for once, I was the one holding all the cards. The meal wound down with the heavy, dragging energy of a party that had lost its center hours ago, a quiet, slow unraveling that no one seemed willing to acknowledge out loud. The plates were cleared by my staff with mechanical efficiency, their faces politely blank, trained to handle uncomfortable family gatherings just as easily as rowdy bachelor parties or tearful anniversary dinners. I sat there, swirling the last of my wine in my glass, watching the people who had shaped my childhood into something brittle and sharp now pick at their desserts with forced smiles and darting, guilty eyes. The awkwardness clung to the room like the thick, sour aftertaste of cheap coffee, a bitter weight that no amount of small talk could wash away. Aunt Marlene patted my hand stiffly and told me the meal was very nice, the kind of compliment that tasted more like ashes than sugar. Mom said the lamb was surprisingly tender, her voice so tight that the words seemed to pinch her mouth closed the moment they escaped. Even Ricky, who had spent decades finding new and creative ways to humiliate me at every possible opportunity, mumbled something about the mashed potatoes being pretty good, then immediately found something fascinating to examine on his shoe. There were no real apologies, of course, and deep down, I knew there never would be. That was not how my family worked. In our house, pride was a shield you never dropped, not even when it weighed you down so badly you could barely lift your head. To apologize would mean admitting fault, admitting they had been wrong about me all those years, and I knew better than to expect that kind of vulnerability from people who had spent their whole lives convincing themselves they were always right. Instead, I got stiff hugs, the kind where bodies barely touched and arms stayed rigid like planks of wood, quick pats on the back that felt more like brushing off dust than genuine affection. I got strained smiles and awkward half-jokes about how maybe Jess can get us a discount next time, and guess you're not just the breadstick queen after all, as if that tiny bit of acknowledgement, so late and so grudging, could somehow wipe away a lifetime of dismissal. I smiled through all of it, the same way I had learned to smile through everything else, the jokes, the pity, the low expectations, but this time the smile did not hurt the way it used to. This time, it felt more like a shield than a surrender, a quiet, steady wall between me and the people who had never really known me at all. As they filed out into the crisp spring evening, voices too loud and laughter too forced, I stayed behind for a few moments, letting the quiet settle over me like a blanket. The restaurant lights glowed warm against the darkening sky, the scent of roasted meat and fresh herbs lingering in the air like a memory you could not quite put into words. I walked slowly through the empty dining room, running my hand lightly over the backs of the chairs, the polished wood cool under my fingertips. I should have felt victorious. That was the plan, after all, to finally, undeniably prove to them that I was more than they ever gave me credit for, to shove my success in their faces so completely that they could never again laugh me away like some childish joke. And I had done it. I had pulled off the reveal with the precision of a master chess player, cornered them without ever raising my voice, forced them to look at me, really look, for the first time in decades. But standing there in the empty restaurant, the reality settled heavy in my chest, a cold, unexpected weight that dulled the edges of my triumph. I did not feel victorious. I felt tired. I felt hollow. I felt free, yes, freer than I had ever felt before, but also profoundly alone in a way that no amount of success could ever fully fix. Because the truth is, winning means nothing when the people you wanted to impress were never capable of giving you the validation you craved in the first place. You spend your whole life climbing some impossible mountain, scraping your hands bloody on the rocks, driving yourself to the edge of exhaustion just to plant your flag at the summit, and when you finally get there, you realize the people you thought would be waiting for you never even started the climb. They stayed at the bottom, laughing and pointing, too afraid or too proud to admit they were wrong. And in the end, their laughter says more about them than it ever did about you. The staff finished cleaning up and locking down for the night, offering me quiet smiles and respectful nods, sensing, maybe, that tonight had not just been another dinner service, but something heavier, something that had taken years to set in motion. I thanked them, wished them a good night, and stood alone for a while longer, listening to the soft creaks of the empty building settling into silence. I thought about calling someone, an old friend, maybe, or one of the few people who had believed in me without needing to be shown first, but the impulse passed. Some victories, I realized, you had to sit with by yourself. Some moments were meant to be quiet, to let you feel every jagged edge and hollow place without rushing to fill them up with noise or celebration. I stepped outside into the cool night air, the heavy wooden door clicking shut behind me with a finality that echoed in my bones. The stars were out, bright and indifferent overhead, and for a long moment, I just stood there, breathing in the crispness of the world, feeling the sharp, clean pain of everything I had lost and everything I had gained. Maybe I would never get the apology I deserved. Maybe they would go right back to pretending none of this had ever happened, telling themselves comforting little lies about how lucky I must have been, how it was all just timing or chance or anything, really, except what it actually was: hard work, sacrifice, and the refusal to stay small for their convenience. Maybe it did not matter anymore. Because at the end of the day, the only approval that had ever really mattered was my own. And tonight, for the first time in my life, I could honestly say that I was proud of who I had become, not for them, not for anyone else, but for me. I smiled up at the stars, feeling the brittle, aching edges of my heart slowly start to soften, and whispered into the dark, half to myself and half to the universe, a simple truth that tasted bittersweet and strangely beautiful on my tongue. Sometimes winning feels a lot like losing, doesn't it?